Hello, everybody, and welcome to our live show on this it's beautiful here, Friday afternoon. And I couldn't imagine a better way to wrap up my week than to have this conversation today. We are so excited to have with us Judy Brown, Miss Judy. Judy is an educator, a speaker, a facilitator, a poet, and writer. And her work in organizations really revolves around themes of renewal, change, learning, creativity, and dialogue. Holy moly, that is exciting. So I'm just so excited to be here today. We've had some conversations before this, and I just think it's going to be a wonderful show. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, I'm delighted to join you. It's a gorgeous day. I'm south of Annapolis, Maryland, on a tidal creek, and the light is bouncing off the water. It's a gorgeous day out there after some pretty wild weather that we've had. So it's nice to think of us all together on a Friday afternoon and a kind of relaxed conversation about leadership. And leadership understood as not necessarily a job or a position, but a kind of way of life, a way of being oriented to things. So
yeah, the Eden alternative, we talk about leadership is a behavior. It's not a position. And a special shout out to Jill Vitale Awesome, by the way, who is the president and CEO of Christian Living Services, because she is the one that hooked us up with Judy. And so a little shout out to you, Jill. Hi. So first off, Judy, just kind of want to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about, you have worked in so many different, with so many different types of leadership and different people. I found that fascinating when we were talking. So could you just start us off that way? How's that?
Well, in some way, mentioning Jill is a good way to start. I just wrapped up a program for brand new CEOs, which Jill was because of her new job. And in our field, in the field of service to elders. And a lot of the work I do now is in that field, a long-time leadership development program for Leading Age, one for Kendall Corporation. But over the years, I found myself just working across all different kinds of sectors. So I spent time in manufacturing with Ford Motor Company as an external, initially doing leadership development for engineers, and then working in the plants where there were struggles between management and labor. Done a lot of work with federal organizations of various kinds, a lot of the intelligence community, with the arts, a lot of work with artists of all kinds. So I feel really lucky. And I suppose this sort of pattern of zigzag all over the place reflects the idea that that leadership isn't as dependent or isn't as much about the particular sector as it is the way of approaching things. I was thinking about what you said about the Eden alternative way of thinking about it. I can remember I was doing my graduate class at the University of Maryland. For a while, I taught in the public policy school. I also spent some time in the business school there. But when I was in the public,
of course you did.
I was the chief financial officer. I still look back on that and think, as a poet, that's a pretty rare thing. But anyway, when I was working with the School of Public Affairs and I had my graduate class, we were about halfway through one semester, doing a lot of the kind of work we'll talk about here, which is pretty introspective, pretty self-revelatory. And one of the people in my class all of a sudden said, he was a military guy who was finishing up my master's before he would go on to flight school to fly, I suppose, some kind of very fancy machinery as an Air Force dude.
It's called a jet. A jet sounds cool.
Some kind or other. And he said, I get it. This leadership stuff is not about the job. It's a way of life. And he had sort of startled look on his face, like he realized what he just signed up for and it didn't mean the class. It meant a lifetime of, as a friend of mine says, figuring out how to gather people together to move something that's really important forward.
Yep.
And you can do that in a lot of different ways.
Judy, I love that. And when you were saying you had worked with the Ford Motor Company, my husband's a mechanical engineer.
Ah,
So, right. So I am not the same person I was 15 years ago. I've learned so much about leadership. And we were talking in our conversations. The good thing about it is you don't have to be a natural born leader, right? You can learn these skills. So here I am, I've learned all these skills, and he becomes a manager of his mechanical engineering department. So here I am giving him all these tips on leadership and all that. And so it's just really interesting because the things that he talks about, it's not specific to the widgets they make. It's about how to move forward together as a group. And there are so many commonalities in that between industries
yes.
that we see as well. So I just thought that was great.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of get into it a little bit.
Yep.
So the first thing we were talking about, which I thought was really cool, was something called the narrative identity.
Oh, narrative identity.
Narrative identity. Yeah. So what is this? How does it affect us as leaders?
Well, it's the phrase itself is something that I've just begun exploring. And in doing so, I realized I've been working with it all my life. And I just didn't have a language for it. And I think it's really helpful and interesting stuff. The idea behind it is that we have a story we tell about how we came to be where we are. And we also have a story to tell about where we are right now. And then we have a story to tell about how we hope things might unfold for us in the future. And if we're a leader, then the question becomes, how might they unfold in a sustainable way? Because so many of people who right now hold leadership by position in our field are worn out, tired out, exhausted, have been under huge pressures because of COVID for months and months and months and months. And we have no idea how much longer this is going to go on for us.
Right. Burnt out,
right. On the edge of burnout. And I'm hoping that our conversation will help some people who are on the edge step back from the edge a bit. But narrative identity helps us see our story in a more complete way. I think we have a tendency to sometimes simplify our story and think, well, what I offer in this situation comes from this history that I have. And we sometimes ignore other parts. I want to give an example of this. When I was working with the guys at Ford, in particular, when I was working on the plant floors, there's huge, huge emphasis on safety and huge commitment to it. I had an experience in my own life that would have been hugely relevant to that, but I never mentioned it because of a mindset that what would make me useful in my work at Ford Motor Company was being an expert in leadership, working at a university. So I never mentioned that I had been a Pan American flight attendant and had all kinds of safety training because of that work, had a lot of experience with the importance of safety. I didn't say a word about it because of this notion that what was relevant and helpful was a fairly narrow construct. Yeah. So what I love about narrative identity is that it helps us think about ourselves in a much richer, fuller way. So, Chris, can I give people an assignment?
Yeah, I love it. I'll take it too. I'm going to do the assignment. What's up?
All right. So I want to give us each 3 questions, and it's actually the 3 questions that guided the program for new CEOs to help us think about what our full story is. So the first question has to do, one way to do this is a stepping stones exercise, which is to say to people, what are the major stepping stones or turning points or choice points that have brought you to where you are in your work and your life? And people always say to me, well, it's got to be one or the other. I say, no. it's your work and your life, as if it's a hyphenated word, the whole thing. All right. That's an example of using a narrative identity as a way of explaining yourself, not only to others, but to yourself.
Yeah.
You know, what brought me here? So I want to use that as an example, the stepping stones exercise as an example of narrative identity. And then I want to give you 3 questions for the different seasons of narrative identity. All right.
Yep.
So the first question that we asked people was, think about the younger you, the earlier you, wherever you are in your life, the earlier you. What, and whichever situation pops up, you know, for me, what comes up is the flight attendant experience. But think back to that, and what would the earlier you have to say to the you now about what not to lose sight of? Now, you would think that it would be the other way around, that you'd say, what would you say to that person now about what they decided and did? No. What did they understand about you, or hold true about you, or represent about you, that you don't want to lose sight of now, quite at distance from that time? So that's the first question. Okay. The second question is, tell me what it's like to be you now. All right. So the second question is, what's it like to be you now? All right. And just to think about that, to explain yourself to yourself and others in terms of how is it to be you now. Chris, here you are running a show. It's entirely possible that a few years back you wouldn't have thought of that.
Never would I see myself in this place. Like,
Right. So a series of stepping stones got you here, but there's probably something in the earlier you that would have wisdom about what you bring, what gifts you bring to this time now.
Right.
So what would the earlier you say to you now? What would you say about who you are now? And then the next question, as a leader, particularly, and as people end up rising into positions of more and more responsibility as leaders, more and more demands, this third question is particularly important, which is, if you think, you can start by thinking of people who you think of toward the end of their careers and how inspiring they were. And you think of, gee, I'd like to turn out like that, however that is. What future you would you hope for that would be full of joy and excitement and enthusiasm at whatever stage of their life, that you now in your leadership role need to begin thinking about in order to end up in that place of vitality and joy at that future time? So it's not about what particular position or what particular situation, but it's almost about what orientation would you need to have toward your life in order to end yourself up at whatever point that might be, full of joy and vitality, making contributions, having
good well-being, balanced well-being.
Hugely.
You talk about well-being a lot at the Eden Alternative.
Yes, that language is very, very powerful. Well-being would be it.
So when we're thinking about these 3 questions, are we taking, so, okay, I get the first one, great. I totally, really interesting to think about, right? Second one, interesting to think about. The third question, are we taking into account, I guess if we're thinking of being in that place of vitality and well-being, is it about taking what we have in our past and our present into our future? Or, I mean, what?
It might, and it might not be. I mean, one of the possibilities is that I might have gotten to where I am by being an incredibly hard worker And so now I'm in a position where some of my friends might look at me and say I'm a workaholic.
Okay.
Might say, and so I may be in a situation where my commitment to my work is actually wearing me down. And what I really need to do is have a sense of balance in my life that I don't seem to have right now. And that may require, what would I want to say? Not setting aside, but lightening some of the things that I carry as absolutes about how I'm going to be as a professional. So it might require that I take vacation that's offered. I actually take it.
Be a start. Yeah.
That'd be a start, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I particularly, there's a book called Resonant Leadership that looks at what's the nature of leaders that people feel resonant with. That is, they just sort of connect with them. You know, they feel, and the part of that research that absolutely grabbed my attention, that I keep reminding myself and everybody I can of, is that it's possible to be so committed and so driven that you drive yourself into the ground. Most of us know that. We know that it's possible to have habits that are really bad for our health as leaders. Lack of exercise, not good diet, working way too many hours. You can make a whole list of these things.
Sure.
And to feel that because the work we do is so important, and Chris, it is important. That's the thing that's difficult about this.
Right.
You know, if we were doing something that felt less important, this would not be such an issue. But there are lives at stake in the kind of work that we do. So thinking about that and taking our work so seriously can put us on a path of essentially kind of gerbil wheel where we're just going around and around and around. Right. And I want to talk a bit about what that does, because we won't stop it for ourselves, but the research says that will drive our organization into the ground. That's what'll get our attention. All right. So let me talk a little bit about that notion, which is, if I'm running an organization, and I've actually, other than having been in academic settings and done a lot of consulting work, I've actually been in charge of things here and there. And so I have the feel of this sort of thing. I know how it goes. So it feels like everything's sort of up to me, is what I would say, you know, and I've just got to keep working harder and harder and harder. And as I do that, I have to override my own sense of exhaustion or my own sense of depletion, whatever. I have to override all of that. And when I do that, I'm less attuned to myself. That would be obvious. But because I'm less attuned to myself, I'm less attuned to you if you're working with me. And when I'm less attuned to you, you begin to say, you know, I don't know what's doing with her, but she just seems a little off. And, you know, I think I'll just keep my distance from her. And when some crisis hits the organization, I am not in tune with my own intuition. I'm not in tune with you. You're not about to offer me a point of view.
No, because you're unpredictable at this point.
You got it, Chris. That's exactly it. And so I make a quick and bad decision, and that puts the organization into a spiral. And because of that, I can't take any time off, and neither can anybody else.
Right. Like so it just starts to spin faster and spin further into the ground.
You got it.
Right.
Now, the only path out of it, this is going to be so upsetting to us. I'm realizing, look at the sunshine in here. I'm trying to figure out, isn't this a crazy question, how to get out of the sunshine? Is this, are we okay so far?
I think we're fine. We're fine. I love the sunshine.
Okay. Let me move back a little. So the only way off this gerbil wheel is cold turkey, which is to take time off. And whether it in some combination of get off the wheel by vacation and really take vacation, and or build into your life pattern time away from that thought process every day. And because when you do that, then you begin to be much more attuned to your own intuitions and instincts. And you begin to think I'm much less crazy and unpredictable. And when something surprising hits the organization, which it always does, it just always does, we put our heads together and we think it through and we make a good decision. And there's more spaciousness in the organization, and the organization is in better shape, and it's an upward spiral.
So I'm hearing so many different things in that. So if you are that far down, you just have to go cold turkey and get some time to yourself. Yes. And there's a big follow-up to that. So when you realize that that's happening, what do you do next? Like, I know, again, at the alternative principle number 8, we speak about empowerment. We speak about, as a good leader, you are proficient at asking the right questions.
Yes.
You have an answer. You're smart. You're a leader, right? You behave the right way as a leader, and you also have a position, but you have answers. Everybody does. But when we collectively come together, we always come up with a better answer. And that pressure that you talk about, that leaders feel, that can be lightened, right? So what does that look a little bit like?
Well, the first thing that struck me as you were saying that is, as a leader in that situation, the first thing I'm going to have to do is have a really honest and sort of authentic conversation with myself and then with everybody else. Yeah. I have to be willing to say, look, I've been modeling behavior here that is not good for me. It's not good for us. And I realize that we have really important things we're trying to do, but we will do a better job of it if we are in a place of mental and emotional spaciousness. So therefore, that's when, instead of just, quietly going off without any explanation, it's a good thing to just be authentic about what's going on. Now take me back to the way you were asking that question, Chris, because I sidetracked myself. Where were you headed with that?
Well, just kind of talking about as being a leader, we feel as a leader that we're duty bound to have all the answers. Like, I actually had one time a lovely director of nursing looking at me and telling me I wasn't doing my job because I wasn't demanding that the staff do something, which would happen to be clean the garage. But it didn't matter. That was not affecting the elders, right? It was their garage. They had to walk through it. The staff did. And I had faith and trust that eventually they would say, this place is a pigsty, we need to do something about it. But because I was the leader, I wasn't doing my job because I wasn't making them, or I wasn't writing them up, or I wasn't doing whatever, using that, that condign power on them, the stick. And eventually, what happened? They said at a team meeting, we have to clean up our garage. It's a mess. Right. Yeah. So, sometimes you can't always do that, but that's sometimes just waiting. Or again, when people come to you, what is that? What are those questions? Something like that.
One of it is pulling back from our tendency to want to tell and sensing that the reason we're in whatever this position is, that we're supposed to have the answers. Ron Heifetz at Harvard wrote a wonderful book called Leadership Without Easy Answers. And if you never read the book, the title alone will do the job. There are no easy answers. And so your ability as a leader to ask really good, insightful questions, particularly questions that everybody has some skin in the game. So it wouldn't be a question like, what's the rule here? It would be a question like, what's the most sensible way for us to approach this difficult situation? And people will have different perspectives on that. And as the leader, you may have to call the shot, but then you'll be doing it with the perspectives of people. The ability to ask a question that everybody has skin in the game on is really important. Mm-hmm. And to ask a question that when somebody tells you what they think or what their perspective is, you can't second guess them. So it's questions that essentially have the sense of, from where you sit, what do you think is the most important thing to tackle here? Mm. It's not the question of what's the most important thing for us to do here. Mm-hmm. It's from your perspective, in the kind of work you do, from your perspective, given your background, what do you think is most important for us to tackle here if we really care about the quality of our people's lives. So the first thing is really good questions. The second is noticing when we get hooked because somebody comes in and thinks we have the answer. And it's kind of nice being able to spout out the answer. I mean, it's really tempting. I always have an answer. The question is it a useful answer or a helpful? I don't know. So realizing that almost always when people come to us with something, a next best step may be to ask a really thoughtful question about that. Maybe to ask a question of how they came to think about it in that way, or what alternatives have they weighed and what are they thinking about at this point? So questions as a practice for a leader are absolutely central. And of course, it's nothing we teach on the way up at all. So we arrive at wherever we are. One of the beauties of being able to ask that kind of question is that it puts us in a space of really listening to the answer. And so for so many leaders, because of the pressures they feel, they don't feel like they have time to listen. And they are likely not to be present. They've got so many things going on in their mind that it's hard to be completely present to the person across from them.
Yep. It made me think of, again, Jill Vitale. Awesome. Hi. I know you're going to watch this. But she talks about in one of her courses that we have is really about being the calm in the chaos as a leader. Right. Yeah. So what I'm kind of hearing from this is too, that a couple different things, people talk about, how do I get buy-in? I hear that all the time. How do I get buy-in, Chris? And when you have someone that you said like has skin in the game,
right.
There you go.
Right.
Right.
I struggle with someone. I struggle so with the term buy-in. I think what we want is investment. We want engagement. We want investment. We want skin in the game. And we're going to be in the middle of this chaos. It's not only the chaos that's so obvious to us right now, but I hate to break the news to us. We've been in a lot of chaos before, and whatever happens, we're going to be in a lot of chaos in the future. And so,
no, stop.
You think it's all going to calm down and level out?
No.
I know. And I don't mean that because of COVID or the pandemic. I mean that that life is just full of rapids. A friend of mine, Peter Vale, talked about leading in permanent whitewater. He wrote that notion probably 30 years ago. And what he was pointing us to is that our life as leaders and in organizations and as humans is full of surprises. And if we can step toward those surprises with a certain set of habits of mind, we're more likely to be able to move things forward in the way we want to. What Peter Vale said, it just used to nail me, is that there were 3 strategies that were really useful for leading in permanent whitewater. And then there were 3 that we usually tried first. And they weren't so helpful, but I'll tell you the 3 we usually try first. They'll sound really familiar to you. All right. The first is to work harder. If I work harder and I just get all the things done on my to-do list, I will be in smooth water somewhere. Okay. The second is to work smarter, harder. Time management. I used to teach time management. I remember teaching time management in Africa to worldwide leaders at Citibank about cultural difference in time and so forth. So time management is a way. And then there's the working technically smarter. And that's my belief that if I just get a better app, I just got a new MacBook Pro, things will smooth out. And what Vale taught us was that there are 3 strategies beyond that really have huge power for us. One is working reflectively smarter, which is our ability to step back and take a breath maybe keep a journal, maybe take a walk, whatever it is, so that we have reflective time to just do an after action review on yesterday, but also just to think about things that we need to think about. The second that he said on the three that are very useful is working collectively smarter, which is to what you said.
Mm-hmm.
The results are always better.
Always better.
Results are always better.
I agree.
We're asking a group of CEOs who have had a lot of experience about a really rough crucible moment that went very badly. One of the questions is, who did you turn to during that time? That is, we almost never ask that of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you got through that. Who did you turn to in that time? And then that's the collectively smarter. And the last one is what he called working spiritually smarter. And one could take that in a sense of religion or spiritual practice, but he meant something much broader. He meant your list of principles and being attuned to the list and testing things against the list.
You mean like your principles and values?
Yep.
Your own principles and values, right? That's the spiritually smarter?
Yes, for you as a person, but organizationally, you can turn toward the spirit, if you want to use that term, the spiritual values of the organization, which are embedded in its principles and its values, not on the paper, but as lived. Okay. One CEO I was working with recently said, look, don't read about it, be about it. I want that as a bumper sticker. And I'm a great reader. And I've written a lot, but don't read about it. Be about it.
Be about it.
Be about it, whatever that means. And be about it in every moment. Not just at the crisis moments, not at the key moments, but every moment. So
just something came up as you were talking about that is something else I think we don't do, which just came up recently, is that we always look at the negative, like what's going wrong, or, what is wrong, or what's potentially going to go wrong, or what went wrong in the past. But we often forget to remember it just reminded me when you're talking those stepping stones, right?
Yes.
So what, when you're asking these great questions as a leader, well, what have you done in the past that worked really well?
Man. That's
what I mean? And we never do that. We don't because we're always focused on what negatively happened.
Right. Well, and I think as a species, in order to avoid saber-toothed tigers and so forth, we've had to pay attention to some negatives. But the challenge is that as leaders, we have much more leverage placing our attention on what is working really well. Sometimes it's just a little sprout of what we had hoped for, but attention grows. It's like fertilizer on whatever it attends to. So as a leader, to realize that, yes, we have problems we have to solve, but being able to turn our attention and other people's attentions to, Chris, as you said, what have we done in the past that worked? Or how did we come together another time around something really difficult and end up in a good place? That kind of leadership goes by a lot of different names. It's asset-based leadership. It's the understanding that as a leader, you have two things that are your highest leverage. And one is where you place your attention, and the second is the words you choose to say. Neither your attention nor your words are budgeted. There's no budgetary cost at all. They're totally free. So it's really important to invest them well. Some of you may have bumped into the notion of appreciative inquiry, David Cooperrider's work out of Case Western Reserve, which is the notion that to ask people, when are you absolutely at your best? When have you been at your best? What about you made that possible? What about other people made that possible? What about the circumstances made that possible? If we begin asking those kinds of questions of each other, what we're doing is we're tapping into the assets already in place, the capacities already in place in people and in the organization as a whole. But it's hard to remember that, because if something isn't working, we sure want to fix it.
You know,
I know.
absolutely. That was like, the sky's falling again and again and again and again.
Yes.
You know, gerbil wheel gets going faster, faster, right? Makes me nervous just thinking about it.
I know. Don't think about
something else.
About something else.
That was something else we were talking about. Was really, I love how you said that. I just have two comments about that. And I want to hear more from you about playing to your strengths, because we had talked about that.
Right.
And it kind of fits into this asset. But you just made me really connect something up, Judy. This is why I just want to thank you for being here. It is an honor to have you on our show. And I just felt like, even through our conversations, I just felt like you're my buddy, and you're like my mentor already. I just feel like I know you forever. So, okay, I'll stop. But we have something at the Eden Alternative that we call simple pleasures.
Oh,
so
language.
It talks about having, really, meaning in people's lives, and what's meaningful to one is not meaningful to another. Now, when we talk about simple pleasures, the way we teach it and talk about it is someone often says a cup of coffee. But what we do is we dive deeper. What kind of coffee? What kind of mug do you like? What do you like to put in it? Where do you like to sit? What time of day do you have it? Do you listen to music? Do you have your dog? So it's in the details. And what I just heard you really say, which I loved, which is because when we talk, so many things line up with the Eden Alternative, what you talk about, is it's in those details. So if we're looking back and saying what went really well, you're saying don't just look at, oh, I was in a place of positivity, right? Don't stop there. What I'm hearing you say is dive deeper. What was the setting? Who were the people? What was going on? What was your personal life like at that time? Well,
and this question that's at the first of those series that I listed is, what about you made this possible, is the thing we most often overlook. All right. I mean, I was thinking, I was raising up my favorite cup, which is my pup cup. My daughter gave me. She has 2 dogs, and this is my pup cup. All right. So the answer would be with my pup cup. But a deeper digging would have to do with, I've been blessed with having a wonderful relationship with my daughter. What about me has made this possible? That's a question I never think of asking. I got lucky and I got a terrific kid, is what I say. And to train ourselves to say, what about you made it possible that this was a time where you were really at your best? You were the best possible you. What about you? What about others made it possible? And people will say to you, which others? And you just nod, Chris, and go, yes. Any other who had anything to do with it.
Yeah.
And then the final question becomes, how can you put yourself in that circumstance as often as possible as a leader?
Yeah.
Which circles us back to the question that you were headed toward a minute ago, which is the phrase, you can't be all things to all people, but the idea that a wonderful article called The Incomplete Leader by Peter Senge and 3 other authors, with the notion that none of us is good at everything. And while it's good to be competent at all the dimensions of our leadership work, our real leverage is just using our signature strengths full bore ahead and staffing the rest of the team to the things we can't do that well, and then cutting those people some slack, because they're going to look at things differently. And we're going to find ourselves going, oh my God, I can't believe she's raising that again. Oh my. And the reason is because she sees something regularly I don't see on that team. And it just drives me crazy, but it's absolutely essential that we see it. So that we think what we need to do is make ourselves kind of universally perfect as a leader. No, No, we need to be willing to staff people who think differently than we do, who come from different perspectives, bring different experiences, ask rude questions of us.
And well, I think that's kind of going down the same way, and we have to find that not threatening.
Yeah.
And that's where this kind of self-assessment and, comes into it, because younger me, I mean, or before I learned how to be a leader, it shouldn't be about age. I'm going to say before I took the steps, because you can be a leader at any age. Before I learned about leadership, I would not, talk about fight or flight. I'm going to fight you. You know what I mean? So
I would freeze. You would fight, I would freeze.
Okay, all right. You freeze, I'll fight for us. But really, learning those things about yourself and asking those important questions, and realizing, it goes back to, again, answering all the questions. You feel you're put in that position. Yes. And how do you feel non-threatened or to hire someone who's smarter than you? And you realize it, and it's okay.
Well, and I think part of it is just a series of practices, like when they come at you that way, just take a deep breath. Mm-hmm. I used to occasionally work with Aikido masters, and they used to teach us and executives how to take oncoming what feels like aggressive energy. And the answer is you welcome it and turn with it. As a physical practice. And once I got that physically, then I got it that the incoming is just energy. Mm-hmm. And what I need to do is be able to receive it as energy and turn with it in a direction that serves us both.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, it's a very different way of thinking about it.
Right.
But and this is true for many of us, I had to get it physically in order for it to work for me immediately emotionally. Mm-hmm. There's no talking myself into it, saying, Judith Ann, now really, you should be taking this.
Right. Stop taking it so personally.
No.
Like you're angry at something. It's not you. Yeah, that wasn't helping. You had to really, I think framing it differently. I mean, for me, one of my aha moments, which is much of the same way, was that Viktor Frankl quote about the space. And you really can't control what comes at you. But you can certainly take a moment and control what comes back out. That is within your power and grace. And that, for me, that was like, whoa, that I just, you're right. Same kind
of. And what that requires is creating a spaciousness between the incoming and the outgoing, as you said. You can control what comes out. You can control what comes out if you give yourself a chance to learn. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, leadership is really learning and exploring. That's the thing that's so challenging, because we have a tendency to think we've got whatever the position is. It might be as a team leader. It might be in a variety of situations, because we're so smart and we have the answers. And what would be more useful is to think we've been given this position so we can learn faster and with more people about more difficult things, because that's really what we're up against. Mm-hmm. So it's about learning faster. Learning faster.
We have a comment about accepting and turning with that energy from Denise Hyde in the chat box. She really says, accepting and turning with the energy. Such a great metaphor to help understand the resistance that can come up with change.
Right. And, I'm thinking, Denise, the resistance that comes when I'm a leader, I always say, well, they resist change. Well, so do I. It wasn't my idea. I'm a little resistant myself. So just being able to see it as energy, that the push for change, or whatever the push is, or the pushback, is just energy. It's neutral. And the question is, how do we move with it? Mm-hmm. How do we move with it?
Or how do we turn it around for ourselves so it doesn't affect us?
Right.
And our ability to respond, right?
Yeah. When we talk, Chris, did I play with this notion of how much I'm thinking about current?
You did the last time we talked about the the current.
Yeah, let me say a little about this. Yeah, this is, something that is really with me these days. And part of it is because I kayak and I'm on a tidal creek. So the question of the currents, that is, what's the flow that I'm in? Mm-hmm. Is something I have to pay attention to. And that's true of us as leaders. What kind of current am I in?
Mm-hmm.
But there's another way of thinking about current which is staying current with ourselves. And that is, to what extent am I current with myself about how I am right now and where I am and where my thinking is about things and where my fears are, whatever they are. So that's staying current with the self. Journaling might help with that. Talking with a good friend usually helps, who says, look, I've known you for 20 years, blah, 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 and, sets me up at where I should be. So that's the second kind of current, staying current with the self. The third that's really been interesting me is current as energy. Mm-hmm. And that's in the electrical sense. And Chris, that's what got you and me together. The first conversation you and I had such fun and electricity in it that when you asked me if I was willing to do this, I said, sure. And I was deciding based on, part of it is it's in my current in the sense of the kind of work I do. But part of it was just flat out the energy between the two of us, just having an exploratory conversation.
Yeah.
So tracking those three kinds of currents as a leader, I think helps us move with change because we are on some kind of tidal current of change all the time. Right. Sometimes we're leading it. We think we're in charge of it. Sometimes the world tells us, no, maybe not so much.
In many different ways. Sum that up again. Say the three for us.
Okay. The first is, what is the current or the flow of the circumstance that I'm in?
Okay. So, yep.
The current or the flow
of the circumstance.
And so right now we might say a pandemic is part of that statement. It's not all of it, but it's the flow that we're in. Mm-hmm. And the second is staying current with myself, which is who am I now? Where am I now? How am I doing now? Am I taking care of myself? Am I in balance of some kind? Am I balancing? Staying current with the self and having a way to do that when the world piles on, when things get busy, when the to-do list is too long. That's why for 40 years I had a morning journal practice every morning. Yep. I missed a day last week. It's the first time it's happened in years. I was really astounded. I thought the to-do list has gotten too long. And then the third is reading. Some people would call it reading the energy. That's too sophisticated language for me. But it's just understanding where there's energy in me, in someone else, in a situation, and understanding when there just isn't any. No, there's no energy for that.
Maybe when it's draining you.
Or maybe when it's draining you. Yeah.
Right.
The Quakers, I'm a Quaker by practice, and they have a language for something that is not, it's just draining you and doesn't call you anymore, not only individually, but collectively. And they call it laying something down. And it's a very respectful notion. It's not throwing it out. Yeah. It's laying something down because it doesn't have vital energy anymore. Isn't that an interesting notion?
Yeah. Pretty powerful. Yep. Well, just phrasing it that way. You know what? I need to get rid of this. You talked earlier how important words are, right? I got to get rid of this. I got to throw it away. Has a lot of almost the negative connotation to it. So when you're saying, I'm going to gently lay this down. It's no longer fueling me. It has. I respect it.
You got it.
Whatever it may be. So that's really cool.
And that's often a conversation. This gets back to collectively smarter that we can have with our colleagues. I have a treasured colleague who is very busy, and so am I. And we're in the midst of making a collective decision to just lay down something that we're going to have a great time doing, but we're both too, I don't know what the word is, full up.
Yeah.
To be able to handle it now. And so to be able to just lay it down, even for now, lay it down for now.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So we have a comment from Many in the chat box. It says, Otto Schwarmer, I don't know if I said that right, talks of energy like this as what is wanting to emerge in this moment. You're familiar with that, I can tell.
I am, and
Thank you, Benny.
Yeah, Many is on a different part of the planet than we are. She's in New Zealand.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, you know Benny.
Yeah, I do.
Oh, hello, Benny.
Otto Scharmer talks about what is wanting to emerge in this moment, and that's reading the energy in a sense that's coming toward us.
Mm.
And he talks about the importance of when we're in the middle of something quite complex. He calls it the U theory. And we've thrown out all the ideas of everything and nothing has seemed like it's really all that useful. We sit in a not knowing, a space of not knowing, which is what the bottom of this U is. And we wait for a sense of what is wanting to emerge. And it's not, and we don't look for the perfect answer. We look for something we can experiment with, or something we can run a pilot on, that we can learn from. So it's a very different way of moving toward change than figuring it all out and doing a rollout to everybody.
Right.
Got the right answer. This is assuming the right answer is going to emerge from both an individual process of sitting with whatever the question is, as well as a collective process of sitting with whatever the question is. And so anyway.
So interesting. We have a community that's on a registry. They're milestone 4. I know everybody might not know what milestones are, but 4 is as far as you can get, right? 4 is the woo. You are milestone 4 on the path to mastery for culture change, Sherbrooke, up in Saskatoon, Canada. And they talk about walking the path as you lay it.
Yes.
That's what that reminds me of.
Yes.
Walking the path as you lay it for individuals and their organization. They are fantastic. But they're always out there experimenting in that way.
There's a famous poem by Antonio Machado about Pilgrim, there is no road. You make the road by walking. It's the same notion.
Oh my gosh.
Very powerful.
I could talk to you all day. Okay, we only have a little bit of time left, and I know we want to hear a lovely poem from you, but one thing we just didn't talk about, which I know we promised to talk about, so if you could just touch on this one, is the unpredictability in leadership. How do we lead in a way that is sustainable? We mentioned it in the beginning a little bit, but do you have anything else to say on that, Judy, in your wisdom?
I think sustainable leadership means being able to return to a calm center, no matter what the circumstance is. And that doesn't mean in any way to deny the difficulties surrounding us of all the different kinds, but to realize that leadership is an inside job. And it really requires that by whatever means we can find that we are able to return to a place of not necessarily being balanced, but balance in our lives, a calm kind of center, a centered sense of self from which we can operate no matter what the world throws at us. And I think in some ways has to do with what we love, what our commitments are. One short poem of mine that even I can remember goes like this: you cannot live in the house of love and the house of fear simultaneously. Choose where you settle. It will change your world. And so much of the time as a leader, if we allow ourselves to be thrown into a fear space rather than out of our passion for what we're doing, we're settling in the house of fear. And you can't be in both houses at once.
Right.
So I don't know what made me think of that. Anyway.
That's what we're about. It's a chat on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, great.
I love it. I love it. So, yeah, some people are they're putting a couple comments, just reiterating what you said in the chat box. So that's great. So I know you have, I think, a poem to share with us, and I'm very excited about that. And also, we're going to be popping in Judy's your website. We'll bring that up as well. I went on there, lots of good stuff on there, right? And ways to contact you. And you also have, we're going to put 2 leadership links to your leadership books in the chat box, but you also have some poetry, right? You have four books of poetry. What are they called?
4 books of poetry. Simple Gifts, The Sea Accepts All Rivers, stepping stones, which is that exercise that I mentioned, and no one swims alone, which was my mother's rule for living on the lake.
We had the hour after you eat, but okay, no one swims alone. I like that.
Yeah.
All right. So all of that is available, just so you know. You can find it on Judys' website. So we're doing a plug for you. You didn't.
Thank you.
We wanted to do that. Yes, absolutely. Please. So again, well, let's hear your poem and then we'll close up. I'm excited.
This is the poem that people keep sending back to me and asking permission to use it for all kinds of things. Comes
right after we talked, you got an email while we were talking.
That's right.
Someone had contacted you and asked your permission to use the poem. So
yeah, it comes wrapped in other people's lives. It's called Fire, and it's about spaciousness, which is really what allows us the chance to be centered in the challenges that we have as leaders. It's also a recipe for building a fire. Very simple. What makes a fire burn is space between the logs, a breathing space. Too much of a good thing, too many logs packed in too tight can douse the flames almost as surely as a pail of water would. So building fires requires attention to the spaces in between as much as to the wood. When we are able to build open spaces in the same way we have learned to pile on the logs, then we can come to see how it is fuel and absence of the fuel together that make fire possible. We only need to lay a log lightly from time to time. A fire grows simply because the space is there, with openings in which the flame that knows just how it wants to burn can find its way. That's it. Recipe for a fire and for leadership.
I can almost picture flames dancing around in those open spaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You need space.
Then if people want to take a look on my website, there's a beautiful version of that from a friend of mine who did a session for CEOs on tending the fire. And his daughter did a beautiful visual with the poem. So it's on the website. Come and take a look.
Love it. Love it. One last comment. Denise Hyde said, I have the book, The Art and Spirit of Leadership, Judy. She's highlighted it and you have inspired her to reread it again. So
All right.
Thank you very much. And on that note, but it's been almost an hour. And like I said, we could probably go on forever. And I do hope to speak to you again someday. You're just, I don't know, inspirational for sure. I thank you for being with us here on this Friday afternoon in your rocking chair on your creek or your river. Yeah, we hope you come visit us again sometime.
Thank you
so much.
My pleasure.